What I mean when I say holistic is a really integrated approach to healthcare, looking at the impact of diet and supplementation, lifestyle factors, what the layers of your life have looked like up until this point, and how is that making up your current everyday symptoms. The reason we want to block blue light in the evenings is because we are supposed to live in alignment with the natural light cycles. Once the sun has gone down, there is no light. Until we invented the light bulb. As a woman, we have a 28-day hormonal cycle, and then men have a 24-hour hormonal cycle. We cannot expect to perform in the same way.
What are your views on the biological clock?
It is not really true that fertility drops off a cliff when you hit 40. The best birth for your child is a vaginal birth. They're getting the benefit of seeding from all of the different microbiome systems within your body when they come out of the birth canal. They're having the right compression of their skull as they come out. You can go and look at pictures of breast milk from a mother that's feeding a baby with a cold or an illness and the mother that's not, and the difference in the colour of the breast milk is astounding, and that's because your body knows which immunoglobulins to put into the milk.
Grace, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Emily. It's great to be here.
So you describe your holistic approach to nutrition and lifestyle medicine, but I want to ask you, what is a holistic approach to nutrition and lifestyle medicine? Can you break that down for me?
Sure. I think have you taken that from my website?
I have indeed, word for word.
I was writing that again now. I might find some different way of saying it, because I think that the word holistic's been taken by the wellness industry, and it makes it makes what I do potentially sound less scientific than it is, because what I do is very grounded in biochemistry. But I think the holistic side is that what we're trying to do as nutritional therapists is see the body as a whole and not compartmentalize it into its individual parts, and to really understand that all of your body systems that are working together and have a relationship and an impact on each other. And so it's holistic in the sense of it being a whole, rather than maybe holistic in the sense of, I don't know, bioresonance, or I'm already raining on other people's parades. But what I mean when I say holistic is a really integrated approach to healthcare, where we're looking at the impact of obviously diet and supplementation, but obviously lifestyle factors as well, and even just how you're talking to yourself mentally, and potentially like what past trauma you may have had, or how you're what the layers of your life have looked like up until this point, and how is that making up your current everyday symptoms. So yeah, I think that's kind of what it means to me. It might mean different things to other people.
And when we say lifestyle medicine, it's almost quite overwhelming, that word lifestyle, because it is so encompassing, as you say, of every aspect of our life, whether that is past experiences or present situations or emotions, or our diet, our exercise. There's a lot of different factors to look at. So where do you actually start? What do you prioritize? Generally speaking, obviously, case by case, it will vary. But what are the key factors or red flags that you look at when examining the holistic lifestyle health?
That's a really good question, because I think, if you went to my Instagram, or if you went to anyone's social media, it'd be very easy to jump to, say, for example, you're looking at my page, you might think, oh, she's going to get me to do red light therapy and like grounding and dry body brushing and, all of these things, or she's going to get me to structure my water, but actually for me, it's starting with the basics. Like, for example, if somebody is not sleeping, I'm going to start there, because that is, one of the most fundamental elements to maintaining a healthy body and healthy immune function and healthy detox, all of these things that are happening overnight while we're sleeping. So it's sort of, as you were saying, completely depends where the client is at, because I do get a lot of people that come to me and they are already getting loads of morning daylight, they're wearing blue blockers at nighttime, they're filtering their water, they're prioritizing organic food. And yeah, for those people, I'm maybe diving in at a much deeper level and tweaking very small things. But for some people, it might just be Can we get you eating a bit more color? Can I get you sleeping better? Can I get you off your phone a bit earlier so you can actually get that quality sleep? I think probably looking at people's light environment is something I generally tend to do with everyone, just because it is so fundamental to hormone levels and, you know, getting that good sleep quality. So yeah, it's always meeting someone where they're at. But if a case is, sometimes cases are hugely complex and there's so much going on, and that person's had loads of complex testing done, and they've maybe worked with other practitioners in the past, or they've gone through the conventional medicine route and they've got to a certain point, but then on their questionnaire it says that they only get 5 or 6 hours of sleep at night. I'm starting there. Nothing else is happening until we've started with those real, like, basic core foundations to what helps us thrive as humans.
It's so interesting how the recommended amount of sleep, let's say 8 hours, is such a significant portion of our day. It is literally a third of our day. And yet often we can think, where should I start with my health? Where should I look? Like, what about the thing that like is the most significant time sink? It's not a sink in terms of you do get a lot back from it, but in terms of time, taking up time. I read a study that if women who are pregnant get 8 hours of sleep, on average, at least 8 hours of sleep, especially towards the end of their pregnancy, there's studies linked that their labor will be shorter. And obviously, there'll be so many different variations and cases that aren't applicable here. But generally speaking, and you think, wow, like I'm not sure how the science works behind that, but I do believe it because sleep is so healing, sleep is so restorative. It resets our mental health, our physical health, our muscles recover. It, emotionally, we feel a lot more stable when we get enough sleep.
Mm.
So it's so interesting that that's often something that we neglect quite a lot. And I want to hear a bit more about this light health and the blue blockers. And because, you know, the blue blocking glasses, are they a bit of a placebo effect? Are they, you know, just something that is sold because it's another thing to sell, or do they actually work? Talk me through your experience behind that.
Yeah. Well, the first thing to say is that there are absolutely companies out there that are giving you a run for your money. If you've been sold, because we're doing visuals as well on this podcast, let me just grab mine.
Oh, please. Yes.
If you've been sold a pair of blue blockers that have clear lenses, then they're not blocking out blue light, because what we're trying to block out is the visible blue-green wavelengths of the spectrum. So if you can still see the colour blue or the colour green or variations thereof through your glasses, then it's not blocking those lights. So that's the first thing to say. And you can very easily buy glasses that are quite inexpensive that claim to be blocking blue light, and they're just not. If you want to properly block, the reason we want to block blue light in the evenings is because we are supposed to live in alignment with the natural light cycles. So once the sun has gone down, there is no light until we invented the light bulb and we isolated that fraction of the spectrum. Well, to begin with, we had incandescent bulbs, which actually were a lot better because they included much more of the full spectrum. The issue is with LEDs that we use these days, because they're much better in terms of energy consumption and, you know, therefore supposedly better for the environment. But they are just the blue-green wavelengths. They've been completely isolated. And there's nowhere in nature where you get just that isolation of the spectrum. You always get a full spectrum. You may have like more red tones at sunrise and sunset. You'll have more blue-green tones at midday when the sun's at its highest, but it's always a full spectrum. And it's bad for us to always be under conditions where we have isolated those fractions. So when the sun goes down, we are supposed to go to sleep, and that the sun going down is the signal that your body needs to start releasing melatonin, which is the hormone that promotes good sleep. But melatonin is also dependent on whether you're getting morning daylight exposure. So it's really good to start blocking blue light at nighttime, but it's not as good as also at the same time prioritizing daylight when you wake up in the morning, because what that does is dumps out melatonin and primes the release of it for later in the day. So the more morning daylight you can get, the better actually you might sleep at nighttime. So So many things revolve around this kind of circadian clock that is regulated by light. So your hormonal function, whether your body is primed to digest food or to detox, immune health. It's really very fundamental. And, there are quite good amount of studies now looking at the effects of kind of toxic blue light. And it's not good. It really does not speak to our physiology. So if you want to have better sleep, you can, once the sun's gone down, you can put blue blockers on, which look like this. So like proper red lenses. These are so dirty, sorry, and scratched because my toddler keeps stepping on them. I put them on the other day and they were like basically wonky. And if you pop those on, a couple of hours before bed, ideally, you will get that lovely release of melatonin when you're supposed to and have better, more restful sleep. So many of us just look at our phones on the sofa in the evening, or we're watching something on TV. These are such a, granted they're more expensive than the cheap knockoffs, but such an easy hack. It's not a difficult thing to do in the way that changing your diet or starting a new fitness routine or something like that is challenging sometimes. This is really simple. It's just putting on a pair of glasses and it will very positively impact your health.
And if we go into this circadian rhythm chat a little bit more, if in the depths of winter, as we are approaching now, the nights draw in, it's dark earlier, it gets dark later in the morning as well. And our bodies do react in that way. We feel like we want to get a bit cozier, we want to sleep a bit more, we might put on a bit of weight, we might feel a bit more tired. There's lots of different ways, and people's bodies will react in different ways. But then in summer, obviously, there's less darkness. Do you think biologically, evolutionary biology in this sense, should we actually have slept more through the winter and less through the summer? Because that's quite opposite to the recommended 8 hours of sleep a night all through the year. It's not really set up for our lifestyle at the moment, is it? The modern lifestyle, you can't really go to sleep when it gets dark because, depending where you live, that could be 4 p.m., 5 p.m., 6
Yeah.
p.m.
Yeah.
What's your views on that?
I think, yeah, it's a really good point. And I think certainly that is the case, that typically we probably eat later in the evenings in the summer. We might be socializing, seeing friends, and generally speaking, maybe getting a bit less sleep, but actually feeling fine, because light and the fact that we can synthesize vitamin D and just be outside more is so good for our health. I think you're right. It's hard in winter when the mornings are late and then it's like dark by 4 p.m. The one positive of that is that you have the opportunity at that time of year to watch a sunset and a sunrise if you want to, whereas in the summer, you've got to be getting up at like 5 in the morning if you want to see the sunrise. The reason that's great is because those wavelengths that we get around sunset and sunrise, those near and infrared, the red spectrum is incredibly healing for our cells. It's sort of a fueling up your mitochondria inside your cells. Really, really good. And so that is a sort of silver lining, so to speak, for those very dark winter evenings, is that you can go and watch the sunset at 4 p.m. What I tend to do is, I do find myself probably going to bed earlier. Actually, that's a lie. I always go to bed early, no matter what the season. But what we do at home is we've little by little changed all of our light bulbs in our house to be circadian friendly. So there's some great companies out there selling full spectrum light bulbs, which go from more of a kind of blue, so like a full spectrum that you can have on in the daytime. And then as the sun goes down, you can switch over to like an amber and then a red light. So yes, I'm not going to bed at 4 p.m. in the winter, but as of when the sun goes down, all of the lighting within my house is not telling my body that it's midday anymore. And that's the problem, is that conventional lighting that we do have in our homes and, via our computer screens and things like that, it's communicating that it's midday all the time. And that's problematic from that circadian rhythm point of view. And then other things you can do are, I'll have to share this with you after the recording because I can't remember how I did it now, but there is a way on the iPhone where you can queue up your like side button so that when you click it 3 times, the screen goes completely red.
Oh,
So
wow.
once the sun's gone down, my phone is like that. And so it's kind of protect, so I don't, if I've forgotten to put my glasses on or something. So yeah, there's loads we can do now to support this, like to support a better light environment.
And I think if we go more into the society factors, cultural factors, it's quite hard to take that foot off the gas in when it approaches winter, approaches autumn even, because we do put quite a lot of pressure on ourselves to go, go, go and perform all the time. And even if you take, women and their like menstrual cycles through the month, there's different weeks we feel great, there's different days, different moments in the day we feel great. And then of course, maybe more the human race will, like both men and women will feel this in terms of the circadian rhythm of, we've got more energy in summer, we don't need as much sleep in summer. In winter, it's colder, so actually we need a bit more sleep because our body's burning more calories through the day because we're trying to keep warm. But it's quite difficult to almost find that kindness to ourselves because we actually still won't really change our routine. We'll still be up at the gym at whatever time, and we'll still be forcing ourselves to do this, to do that. And I don't hear a huge amount of conversation about that unwinding, about that feeling kind, taking a bit of kindness to ourselves in adapting to how our bodies feel. Everyone can get full of the cold in autumn and go, oh, this is so annoying, my body's full of the cold. So I'm sure there's a very good reason for that. Maybe because we're going full blast after going full into our summer and not actually winding down or getting that like little bit more sleep. And it's
Yeah.
quite hard to think of like a sustainable solution for the modern day life, for again the average person, that actually works, that can
Yeah.
adapt through the year, because we don't really have a huge amount of flexibility. If your job schedule is your job schedule, it doesn't matter if you've just started your period and you feel awful in the month, or if it's the depths of winter and it's -10 outside. It doesn't really matter. What do you think about that? Like how do you approach that, or see maybe your clients working through that as well?
Yeah, I always think about professional athletes. Like I really love tennis, and my husband and I used to watch a lot of tennis. We're not watching so much anymore, but we would follow like the ATP and WTA tours, and the athletes like playing every week of the year pretty much. And I was just thinking, like, day one of my period, I wouldn't be up for performing at my best, and yet these women have just got to be switched on, and it's really hard. I think a lot of it is these days dependent on, the type of job you have and where you live, because I definitely felt when I was living in London and I was working, for a company, I didn't have as much time to prioritize myself and prioritize rest. And you'd sort of be rushing through your morning routine to get out the door rather than doing what the season demands of you, and like maybe staying in bed an extra half an hour or just having like a slow, lovely, warming breakfast. Um, Certainly living in Cornwall, like the pace of life here is just slower, and I'm really grateful for that. Whenever I go back to London, I do feel like I kind of love the go, 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 but it's fine because I know I'm only there for a couple of days. I just think, doing what you can do with what you've got has got to be the answer. And sometimes it's like tiny tweaks or tiny swaps. Whether it's like you love having a hot bath when you come home from work and that really helps you switch off and wind down, great, do that every day. Whether it's like you feel really calm, like the time you feel most calm in your week is when you've like booked yourself a massage, do that more often. Like whatever it is that brings you joy and makes you feel safe and calm within your body, especially as a woman, is so important to go after those things, because it's very different. We have a 28-day hormonal cycle where we have huge fluctuations across the month, as you were saying. And then men have a 24-hour hormonal cycle. And it's like we cannot expect to perform in the same way. And we need to be very mindful of, what feels best for us in our bodies at certain points in the month. And it could just be carving out an extra 10 minutes to just do some grounding breath work, or it could be just getting your bare feet on some grass first thing in the morning before you go into that bustle of the morning routine and the commute and stuff. We have to just take every opportunity that we've got, I think.
One thing I've been thinking about, well, two things really, is how women go through, this 28-day cycle. And yet each week, as I kind of mentioned before, the work structure is the same. the work deadlines will be the same. They're not really factoring that in. And I don't really know that there's a sustainable way for businesses to factor it in, or an
Mm.
actual solution to this, because it's just really the way society and businesses are structured. So it's more of a discussion point than an argumentative point. And then like I mentioned before, I'm currently pregnant, you're currently pregnant, so we both know how it feels. Working full time while pregnant feels very unnatural.
Mm.
And that's because it is unnatural in terms of what women were doing however many years ago. But of course, now our society, most women do work. Most homes are dual income in terms of, before kids anyway. Obviously, when we bring in children and childcare, it can change. But in terms of needing to earn enough money, a lot of people do, both of them need to work. And it just blows my mind how many women go through pregnancy and work full time and nothing changes in terms of their work deadlines, their work expectant output, their performance, and what they do. It just blows my mind. And I don't really know that there is a solution for it, because, women can't afford necessarily as a like to be off for their whole pregnancy, and they can't, businesses can't afford for women to be off for the whole pregnancy and take time off afterwards. Like, that's not a sustainable outcome. So I don't actually know a solution to this, but it's just
Yeah.
something that I've been thinking about, of how unnatural it feels, because it's hard work. And then, women who have their period week as well and go through their cycle, it doesn't matter, you don't have to, apply this to pregnancy, but it is hard being a woman in the modern scope of how the work structure is. And I
Mm.
don't know the solution, but I just
No,
know
yeah,
it's wild.
yeah. No, I completely agree with you. And I feel very lucky to be self-employed, so that I can, to an extent, schedule the amount of work that I want to do, and I can be quite flexible. If I'm feeling awful or I've got a horrible cold and I need to cancel that day, I can kind of do that. But then at the same time, you've got the sort of financial instability and the fact that there's not really maternity leave if you're self-employed. And so yeah, it's just hard on all sides of the coin, to be honest. They say it's like, don't they say pregnancy is like running a marathon every day or something crazy? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not to be taken lightly. And definitely, if you have got the ability to slow down during that time, do.
It's just an interesting discussion point. And yeah, I think it's hard because it feels quite untangible in ways of how draining it is, because you don't necessarily notice day on day change. It's kind
Mm.
of week on week, month on month.
Yeah.
But I think I find it quite an interesting phenomenon to think, and I haven't found a solution yet, because as you say, you've chosen to go in the self-employed route, but it has pros and cons. So
Mm.
everything does. But leading on from that, you have done a lot of research in fertility studies. You're an expert in fertility. Can you give me a little bit of background in that, and then also kind of what that actually means? What does it mean to be a fertility expert?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm a nutritional therapist and I specialize in fertility. So I've done advanced fertility training with the FNC, which is the Fertility Nutrition Center, which is an organization led by Sandra Greenbank, who's an amazing practitioner, who's been really pioneering in this field for so many years. And the FNC as a group, we try to be at kind of the cutting edge of all the research that's coming out within the field. And I suppose the reason I went into this area was just through my own personal interest. And we had IVF to conceive my son, who's 3 now. And that was a journey that I knew we were always going to have to go on, because I had some like gynecological stuff happen when I was younger. So I had a big ovarian abscess when I was 17, and I had an operation at that time, and not really sure why I had that. The hospital weren't either, just like was a bit shit, and was quite unwell for a bit afterwards. And then I think, and from that point on, my mum was just really good about taking me to a private gynecologist in London every year, just having like hormone levels checked, like AMH, see what my egg reserve was doing. And I think maybe it's because the hospital had sort of indicated to her that I might struggle with fertility in the future, or she was just, the women in my family have typically really had a difficult time to conceive. And so she kind of kept on top of that. And it was on one of my appointments to my gynecologist, I just was saying about can I have a scan? I feel a bit sort of painful. And we just had a scan, and he said one of my fallopian tubes was infected and that they should remove it, because if any of the kind of infected material or whatever was to get into the womb, then that's kind of game over, but you can still get pregnant without a tube. So then I had that operation when I was 22, and actually when I was under, they decided to take out both tubes, which meant that I woke up and I was infertile. So that was quite a big life shift for me. So I always knew I would need to have IVF from the point of needing help to get from A to B. So I was never sort of infertile or struggling with unexplained infertility in the conventional sense. It was more that, I needed that help to get from A to B. And I did the advanced fertility training before we went through our first IVF round. So I was very aware of how to optimize egg quality and how to optimize sperm quality for myself and my husband. And so we were, fortunate to have, I think it was 18 eggs collected in our first cycle, and 7 of them fertilized to become really good blastocysts, of which the clinic were like, you're so lucky. It's like, actually been preparing for this for like a year, but yeah, thanks. I think, a bit of luck involved, but a lot of hard work too. And so now I predominantly support couples who are on a fertility journey, either wanting to conceive naturally or going through an assisted cycle. I'd say it's kind of 50-50 actually between my client base, people that are going through trying to conceive naturally, and those that are already kind of booked in with IVF clinics and things like that. And it's a very, obviously there's optimizing egg and sperm health, which is really key, but it goes way beyond that and gets into some quite complex places with some clients. So we might be looking at things like uterine and vaginal microbiome testing. We might actually be, the FNC, we have a prescribing pharmacist that we can liaise with if clients need prescription for antibiotics. For example, if we find something within the vaginal microbiome that really is going to hinder fertility efforts that, needs to be got rid of, then we might prescribe through him. We'll obviously look at things like semen analysis for the men, but going one step further, we might look at DNA fragmentation levels within the sperm itself. So it's a lot more than you can get done at a fertility clinic in terms of the testing, because the goal is to get couples pregnant and a successful, healthy baby at the end of it. And that does often necessitate looking in areas that just haven't been looked in before. And whether it's because the funding's not there to do these tests, or because it just takes really long for evidence in the medical literature to make it into kind of our mainstream discourse, so it just hasn't done that yet. For whatever reason, there's just not as much available to people that sometimes that they need. And that's where we can really help with that sort of thing.
You mentioned when you were talking about your own experience that, the women in your family have struggled to fall pregnant. And I was just wondering what the reasons are for infertility that you commonly see. What can be, like, is genetics, like, is it a hereditary thing? Or are there other lifestyle factors? I'm sure there's lots of different ones that play into it, but what are the main things that you look at or try and examine?
Well, there could be some hereditary factors, because things like methylation, which is a process that happens everywhere in your body, but is really important for like cell division and DNA synthesis, is crucial for fertility. That can be genetic, because we can pass down genetic polymorphisms from our parents, to us, which would make our methylation like less effective. So for example, if we tested someone's methylation, which I usually do if they've had early pregnancy loss or recurrent loss, then methylation is something I really want to look at, because it's like part and parcel of that kind of cellular division process, which at the beginning, that's all the developing embryo is, isn't it? It's a collection of cells that need to divide. Someone could have like a uniquely higher B6 need than someone else walking down the street, and that's just down to their genes. And perhaps that's not being met by their current dietary intake, and actually in terms of supplementation they need to be on something a bit higher, a bit more complex in that regard. So yeah, there are some genetic things for sure. And then there's things like literally days ago. So there's 7 years between myself and my older brother. So it took my mum that long to have me. And then like literally days ago, she was like, "Oh, I had endometriosis." I was like, "What?" And you didn't mention. So there can be things like endometriosis, adenomyosis. Those are two conditions that affect a lot of women and absolutely will impact the ability to conceive. So it might be looking into things like that and supporting. And typically, if there is endometriosis and it's quite advanced, then usually the recommendation is to go straight for an assisted cycle. It could be things like PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. That's quite a common one in clinic. Sometimes it's male factor. Often it's male factor because sperm health is so impacted by lifestyle and diet. It's really easy for, even with you just less than adequate antioxidant intake and a few too many saunas, and your semen parameters are going to be on the floor. So it does, it just really does depend on a case-by-case basis, but there's lots of things we can look at.
What about age? Because that's quite an interesting topic of the biological clock, and it's something that women are kind of, it's flung in their face quite a lot. And
Yeah.
we obviously have, I feel like I'm talking a lot about society and like social pressures, but you've got your career, you've got this biological clock, you've got all of these things going on at once, and you try and kind of find your happy medium in the middle and balance it all at once. What are your views on the biological clock? Is it as important as some people say it is?
Yeah. I mean, look, you're definitely in a better place to conceive when you're younger. But it is not really true that fertility drops off a cliff when you hit 40. It's
People
more,
even say 30. I've seen people
yeah,
say age 30. Like what, you know, it, there seems no conclusive like, statistics on it. It's a lot, isn't it?
yeah. And I mean, whatever the age, it's not a case of like it just stops at that age. It's a gradual decline, but there's still so much that can be done diet and lifestyle wise to improve the quality of the eggs that you have got left. And we get really hung up on AMH testing, which stands for anti-Mullerian hormone, and it's a marker of your ovarian reserve, so how many eggs have you got left. And it can breed so much fear into women. Oh, my AMH level is really low, and like I haven't met my forever partner yet, and should I freeze my eggs? And it's a useful marker, but it should never, in my opinion, be looked at completely on its own, because it's not telling us the full picture. Obviously, we do need eggs, but we only need one good quality one, and actually the quality is often far more important than the quantity. So looking at AMH in the context of what all the other hormones are doing is much more useful. And I think it's good to be across these things and to be on top of these things. Like there's some good companies that have sprung up in the recent years that will do like a full workup for you. Like Fertility is one of them, where you can log in online and get sent a blood test kit and answer some questions and things, and that's quite a nice way to kind of keep on top of things. But I think the key thing is to not panic, because the panicking in itself is also not going to help. But it is really hard because as women, we are born with all of the eggs that we will ever have, and they do decrease. And I think we're meeting people later and later into life now, aren't we? Like it's so hard to meet people. It's all done on an app, and it's just, the world is a really different place. And I think it's I can see how it's really, really tough, like emotionally, for people that maybe haven't met their partner yet and are worrying about this. But get yourself to a nutritional therapist, fertility specialist, and work on the egg quality and things like that, so that you have got options if you want to go through something like egg freezing, or that you've put yourself in the absolute best place possible, so that when you do meet someone you want to go down that road with, you're ready. But it's tough. It's tough being a woman, isn't it?
It is tough being a woman. I feel like that summarizes it. But then there's other factors as well. We've got stress. You mentioned worrying, like worrying about it's not going to help.
Yeah.
People, maybe this is like a myth of, people say, stop stressing about it and it'll happen and things like that.
Yeah,
And then of course,
it's like I think it's
You know,
people love to say that, but I do feel like there is some truth in that because,
which is
you know,
probably why it's so infuriating if you're going through that people say that to you.
yeah, and I mean it's impossible not to worry, and it's impossible like when you're going through IVF and all of or even just like month on month you're logging your fertile window and you're having sex on those days and it's not working, like it's obviously unbelievably stressful. I guess the thing to say is that just, as much as you can in the other areas of your life, try and balance out with some calm and find some grounding practices that make you feel really safe and happy in your body, because cortisol, like our stress hormones and our sex hormones, do have a very intricate relationship. And when cortisol is really elevated, we typically don't see as good a progesterone response in the luteal phase of the cycle, and that will impact things. And it's also just from the point of view of a woman's body needs to feel nourished and safe in order to have a pregnancy. Because if we go back to like hunter-gatherer times, when you're pregnant, you're not as able to defend yourself, you have higher nutrient needs, you need to rest a lot and like lie down, like we were saying before. So your body needs to know that it's in a really safe environment in order to kind of allow itself to go through that process. So yeah, the waking up at 6 a.m. and hitting the gym while it's still dark and having a coffee on an empty stomach and all these things we love to do because we're kind of go, 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 doesn't quite fit with perhaps the way that our bodies want to function as women.
It is interesting when we go back to the comparison of hunter-gatherer times and now, because it's quite simple almost looking back at it now, where it feels a lot more complex if we examine, lives as the average life now. Because even if you think about, women who are pregnant, they are a bit more vulnerable because they're not able to move as easily, they're not able to run as fast away from predators and so on as you go more and more through. So therefore they need to be with a partner who will provide food for them, because it's more difficult to find food, who will protect them so that they don't need to run away from so much. And therefore, I guess the relationship itself, I can imagine if you are going through that, it's really stressful and it puts pressure on your relationship. And therefore, it's not as secure. And that's another type of stress, as well as
Mm.
work stress or friendship stress or just general life. We have so much stress. If you have like any sort of monitoring wearable device, there's a stress monitor. That is how much stress we have. And not all stress is bad, because as you say, if we're doing exercise, that is counted as stress on our body. And that
Yeah.
that is good stress. It builds up fitness. But then there's also the stress that isn't so good because it doesn't really have benefits, because it's that links to that fight or flight. And obviously we aren't flighting from something or running away from something. We might just be really nervous about our presentation, but it doesn't mean that we're going to be killed at the end of it or eaten at the end of it. It may just give us some consequences, but it still has the same response in our body,
Yeah.
and it still takes the same toll on our body without actually protecting us from the risks. So
Yeah.
it just is interesting, the frame that we sort of live in now, of that strip lighting, the pressure, which is sort of artificial pressures of, it's not an actual real danger. Of course it is, in terms of everything has consequences. If you mess something up at work, it will have a consequence, but it's not like a consequence of you're being chased by a bear and
Yeah.
you're going to get eaten if you don't run away. It's just quite interesting how the structure of the lives that we live in now still kind of replicate a lot of the same stresses and feelings of our body's responses,
Mhm.
but it maybe is actually a bit more, because we might have 50 different spikes of stress through the day, whereas we might just have had one big stress of, oh, there's a predator nearby.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's those micro stresses that really weigh on us. And I think that's why, wellness trends and things and are becoming people are becoming so much more aware of how beneficial those can be. And I think that's great. Lots of us are turning to things like breath work or, going to a yoga class, that kind of thing is really being like an integral part of our day. And so it should be, because yeah, as we've kind of said, modern life is really very hard on the body.
And you also do some work with the pregnancy and then postpartum recovery and life after pregnancy. What are some misconceptions that you've come across in your work and your research, your own experience as well?
Um, well, I think the whole kind of bounce back culture is one that's like slowly. I'm certainly seeing that slowly like ebb away, which is a great thing, because, you know, as a woman that's just given birth and is hopefully breastfeeding, you're at your most nutrient deficient state, you know, way more than you were in pregnancy. You've gone through a whole pregnancy, you've come out the other side, you've been through maybe a difficult labor, you're now breastfeeding, and it's like that is the time we absolutely need to look after ourselves, but it's the time where we absolutely cannot, because we're up throughout the night with the newborn. We haven't got time. You know, your partner's gone back to work after 2 weeks, no one's making you breakfast, so what, you grab a piece of toast. Like, it's really, really hard, because obviously at that stage in our lives, like way back when, we would have been nurtured by our surrounding community, and people would have made you warm, nourishing food, and, you know, like held the baby while you had a nap and all the stuff. And now we're just alone a lot of the time. So I think that can be really tough to navigate for lots of women. And I typically tend to see women at the kind of like 6 month to 9 month mark. That's when I get the email inquiries saying like, I'm feeling so depleted, because that's when it hits you. You know, you've breastfed for 9 months, and you've been sleep deprived for 9 months, and you've not kept taking your prenatal, which you absolutely need to, and things like this, and you haven't prioritized like the right foods in postpartum. And so then it's about like, how can we nourish this mother who no longer is able to prioritize herself, who is now putting herself at the bottom of the pile, because that's what we all do, and it just happens. And that's, I thought, you know, a really big shift for first time mums, is that you can't prioritize yourself anymore. And what does that look like, and how does that manifest in your own physical symptoms? And then I think, you know, other misconceptions are with around, you know, around things like childbirth and everything that comes afterwards, that, you know, I don't know if it's a misconception, but, you know, I see a lot of like elective C-section, or assumption that whatever way the baby comes out is fine, and we should be able to decide that. But actually, the best birth for your child is a vaginal birth. And so there
Why?
can be, well,
Why
because
is
they're getting the benefit of seeding from all of the different microbiome systems within your body when they come out of the birth canal. They're having the right compression of their skull as they come out. When we look at the research with things like incidence of even like autoimmune conditions, or, you know, allergy, atopic conditions, mode of delivery and breastfeeding are like the two biggest factors with regards to that. Breastfeeding, I think, is, well, I haven't looked at the actual data myself, but from a podcast I was listening to with a very, very reputable guest, she was saying that there is some emerging research now coming out that's almost putting mode of feeding as more important than mode of delivery, because obviously the breast milk is foundational for supporting the immune system, but also like seeding with prebiotics to promote the growth of beneficial microbes in that child's gut, which then like allows them to then digest their food well and support the immune system, which is predominantly, you know, 70% of which is in and around the gut. So I think, I don't know, there's so much, and you can really piss people off when you go into these subjects. But if I could put one message out there about, you know, what it means to be a mother, is that I do think it requires some sacrifice. I don't think we can just have children in this day and age and just go about it as if our lives haven't changed. Because if you're doing that, then you've had the easiest delivery possible for you as a mother, which might not be the best birth for your child. You're probably formula feeding, which is not the best food for your child. And I feel quite strongly that, yeah, that we need better education around things like breast milk, and we need better education around how different births affect children in their later life. For example, obviously an emergency C-section is very different.
really heard that.
I'm gonna annoy, like, I'm gonna piss people off with that, but I feel that very strongly, and it is evidenced in the literature. So,
And I think that is all that it is, isn't it? It's evidence in the literature. that is controversial in some ways. And obviously we're talking about a standard birth here. If there's emergency C-sections, then there's emergency C-sections. But I think when we actually look at it, it's really interesting, and it makes a lot of sense that it is actually, if you
Mm.
have the vaginal birth, then you have all of these benefits to the child. And that's something I hadn't even really thought about. And I think it's so
Yeah.
important to have these discussions because of that, because we do sometimes don't want to offend other people, anyone's toes stepped on, but it doesn't mean that it's not important. And I
Yeah.
think that breastfeeding as well is something that is quite fascinating, really. My friend had a baby earlier this year, and she's been telling me lots of little bits about breastfeeding, in terms of, if your child is exposed to someone with a cold or a virus or something, then your breast milk can adapt to,
Yeah.
give it some
Very
antibodies.
well. I mean, you can go
How
and look
wild
at
is that?
pictures of breast milk from a mother that's feeding a baby with a cold or an illness, and the mother that's not, and the difference in the color of the breast milk is astounding. And that's because your body knows which immunoglobulins to put into the milk, and that's the kind of information that is absolutely not shared
Mhm.
by your midwife or your primary care facilitator. And it should be, because breast milk is what helps train and communicate messages of tolerance to the baby's immune system. And this is especially important when we start introducing solid food, because if you imagine a child of 6 months, you start giving them like random bits of food that's covered in bacteria and is full of these big clunky proteins that they've never been exposed to before. They've only been exposed to human milk oligosaccharides. If your child's formula fed, it's different, because formula is its food from day one. And so it's a massive affront to the immune system at that age. If you can keep breast milk in there whilst we introduce solid food, it's giving that message, that communication of, it's okay, like we can tolerate this, protein, and it's not life-threatening to us. And that is so important, and it will help protect against allergies and intolerances to food proteins. I mean, it's just like, it is just absolutely magic, breast milk, but it's so hard to breastfeed. It's so hard, and there's so little support. And the journey as a first time mum is really overwhelming and really hard. And if I hadn't have known all of these things about breast milk, it would have been so easy for me to give up, because my feeding journey with Jude was bloody impossible. But I was just, very bloody minded about it, and persevered. We got there in the end. But it's magical, wonderful stuff, and it should be encouraged in all scenarios if it can be, in my opinion. But yeah, there's always like, you're always going to kind of upset someone when you talk about these things, because obviously there are women that really wanted to breastfeed and they weren't able to for whatever reason. And I think the other thing to say is that you can be C-section delivery and not be breastfed and still be really healthy. It's not a guarantee. None of these things are a guarantee. I was born vaginally. I was breastfed until I was 2, and I've had all the chronic health issues, under the sun. And part of that actually is this idea of, as mothers, we do pass on our microbiome. And, I hope my mum won't mind me saying this, but like, she didn't pass on the best. And so that's also a really interesting concept. And sometimes I've thought to myself, like, oh, maybe the fact that my son was born by C-section, like, not such a bad thing, because he hasn't inherited my like bad microbial strains. And I've recently started doing there's a new infant baby stool test run by Tiny Health that's come onto the market for functional medicine practitioners, nutritional therapists, those that can order functional tests. And I ran this on my son, and I was so thrilled to see that there was no kind of imprint of C-section. There was no, his microbiome maturation was at the same level as a child that was, the sort of healthy controls. So no lasting impact of being born by C-section. And I think a lot of that is to do with breast milk, but also what we feed them when they turn 6 months really matters, because it can either help build the resiliency of the microbiome and immune tolerance, or it can really hinder it. And a lot of the sort of first foods that we're told to give our kids can be like really unhelpful in that sense, because we're not prioritizing nourishing animal-based food sources. Like, we're typically not giving our kids like meat stocks and strips of steak to gnaw on so that they can, release some iron. Babies that are 6 months need actually a lot of iron. We're not necessarily always giving, broths and stocks and bone marrow and things like that, which we absolutely should be. We're being told to give them baby rice and cereal and grains, which maybe their digestive systems are just not ready for. So yeah, there's no matter, I want to say that no matter how your baby is born, or no matter what the feeding journey is, you can always still have the tools in your toolkit to really support them and the health of their life going forwards.
But I think the point that you said a little while ago of, you have to be quite unselfish in being a mum, because it might be, you might have a certain choice of what is the best birth for you. You might have a certain choice of what the best feeding journey is for you. But actually, when you understand the benefits of breastfeeding and actually what it does and why, not just, hey, this is a free source of milk that means you've got to feed all the time instead of giving a bottle, but actually it has all of these personalized nutrients and it has all of these benefits for you and for the baby, then it's quite an interesting narrative, because I think people shy away from talking about it a little bit because, we don't want to offend people, because people go through really traumatic births and people have really difficult feeding journeys, like you said yourself. And it's not easy. And I think that conversation of saying that it's not easy is so, so, so important. But then also, I think it's really important to talk about the benefits of it, because then you understand why it's important to try and push through if you can. And if you can't, as you said, you can do all the right things and still have someone who, like a child who suffers from health issues, and you can do all the things that aren't on this list and have a really, really healthy child. It's not a guarantee either way. But I think that the discussion of why it's important can be missed, because it is, we don't want to offend people. But I think it is so important to discuss it, because otherwise, how are we supposed to know? Where are we supposed to find this information? As you say, the midwives generally don't tell us all of this, and that's no shade on the midwives. They have a lot of information to pass on to us. They don't have a lot of time or resources to pass that information on to us. But I think that longer form content such as podcasts or YouTube videos or research papers or, books by, like, obviously you need to be careful what source you go to for any of this information. But it can be quite difficult when we flick through, say, social media and get 15 seconds of why you're doing everything wrong, or 10 seconds of how to create a healthy child. Because as you say, it's so nuanced. You can do all of these things and it can have one outcome. You can do all of the best things to have the best labor ever and still end up with an emergency C-section or an emergency, whatever it is.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
It is a very interesting conversation to open up, because as you say, there's not so much research on it. There's not so many studies on it. So we do need to be careful where we get our information from, but also discussing it with friends who are breastfeeding or who are struggling breastfeeding. Why are they struggling? What are they struggling with? And it's not to scare each other, but it's that support is so important as well, isn't it? Because I've heard people say, it takes a village. That saying, it takes a village to raise a child. And of course that we're really loving going back to, the olden days of, you'd have that village of people where all the generations would live together, and as you say, you'd have a nap and someone else would hold the child. But we don't have that so much now. We live in this digital age where we can work remotely. We might not live near family. We might not even live near friends. We might be living abroad. We might be doing whatever it is, because we have so much freedom to do so, which is amazing. But there are different then factors of that. We can feel a bit more isolated. We can, our partner might be back to work in 2 weeks after the baby's born, or even less than that in some parts of the world. And you could be by yourself, and it is hard. And I think acknowledging that is so important as well. And that's where the benefit of social media can come in, because there's so much support available. But it's that balance, isn't it?
Yeah. And actually, I just want to mention here, it feels like a good place to mention my like mum club. But I have a Patreon page, which is, over the last few years, has become a really beautiful space for usually mothers, although it's open to everyone. I'd say that the people that join the live calls each month are normally mums, and then those that ask me questions just in a Q&A box can be whoever. But we meet every month and we just talk on Zoom, and there's a really lovely group that meet, and we're not afraid to discuss things that we're thinking about that are maybe not discussed in the mainstream. If you're worried about the vaccine schedule and how many jabs your 8-week-old's going to get, come and talk to that about us in this very safe space, which is full of really beautiful souls, but mediated by me, who's someone that has the clinical education and the training. And yeah, just know that there are pockets of the internet that are there for you if you want to kind of join them, and it's become a really nice, lovely community. So if that speaks to you, then come join us.
Exactly. There are such lovely parts of the internet that we can really tap into, such as that. And Grace, if people do want to follow you online or join this community or find out a little bit more about what you do or work with you, where should they go?
Yeah, so Instagram probably. I feel like I'm never going to make it onto TikTok. I'm just too old at this point. But I'm very active on Instagram. I'm just at Grace Kingswell. And then my website is gracekingswell.com, where you can get in contact if you'd like to book in for a free discovery call. And yeah, so I still see individuals. So whether you're just dealing with gut health or hormones, or you think you've been exposed to mold, or you've got chronic fatigue or an autoimmune disease, I still do that work. But I also see, as we were saying, like couples on a fertility journey, mums that are postpartum, and then I work with parents who are starting solids with their children and want to do it in a slightly different way, or maybe that their child has really chronic eczema and they're looking for me to help with that sort of thing. So yeah, head to Instagram. I also have a podcast, although I haven't put an episode out in a really long time, and that's called State of Mind. And then my Patreon page, so just Google search Grace Kingswell Patreon and it will come up.
Amazing. I'll pop those links in the description so people can have a little look at that. And thank you so much, Grace, for joining. I really enjoyed our conversation. There's a lot to mull over from it and lots of important things covered. So thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been great.